Welcome back to the Wayne Archive. I am your host, Arthur Wayne, and you are sitting in the one room in this city where the lights never go out and the dust never settles on the truth. If you have a taste for the shadows, if you understand that the official police reports rarely tell the whole story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and lock the door behind you. Tonight, I am pouring a black coffee, lighting a cigarette, and opening a manila folder that still hums with an uncomfortable electric energy. It is a file that documents a psychological siege. We are not looking at a crime scene painted in blood, nor are we tracking a killer with a physical weapon. We are traveling back to the autumn of 1957, to a place where the weapon of choice was an invisible radio wave, and the ammunition was the raw, unvarnished, and deeply destructive truth. To understand the sheer, paralyzing terror of what happened in the picture-perfect town of Oakhaven, you must first completely immerse yourself in the suffocating cultural architecture of the late 1950s. This was the golden age of the American facade. The post-war economic boom had created sprawling, manicured suburbs where every single lawn was cut to the exact same pristine height. Every driveway held a gleaming, chrome-heavy automobile, and every family projected an image of absolute, unflinching moral perfection. But underneath this pastel-colored Kodachrome illusion, there was a deep, vibrating current of severe paranoia. This was the era of the Red Scare, of McCarthyism, of neighbors quietly watching neighbors through twitching Venetian blinds, terrified of any deviation from the strict, unspoken societal norms. In a town like Oakhaven, your reputation was your entire currency. If your reputation was compromised, you were effectively exiled. The town operated on a complex, silent agreement. Everyone had dark secrets, and absolutely everyone agreed to never, ever speak of them in the daylight. That silent agreement was violently shattered on a Friday night in late October. The local radio station, WOKV, was the quiet heartbeat of the town. At midnight, it typically played a soothing, predictable rotation of soft instrumental jazz and popular doo-wop ballads, meant to lull the good, hard-working citizens to sleep or keep the lonely night shift workers company. The airwaves were heavily regulated, heavily sanitized, and entirely safe. But at exactly 12:03 a.m., the smooth, comforting melody of a saxophone was suddenly, violently ripped apart by a deafening burst of heavy electrical static. It was a sharp, aggressive screech of interference that made dogs bark and caused people to jolt awake in their beds, thinking a violent lightning storm had suddenly struck. But there was no storm. As the harsh static slowly leveled out, a voice bled through the speakers. It was not the warm, familiar baritone of the late-night disc jockey. It was a voice that had been heavily, intentionally distorted. It sounded metallic, hollow, and chillingly calm, stripped of all recognizable human emotion or regional accent. It was the voice of a ghost living inside the vacuum tubes of every radio in Oakhaven. The voice did not issue a terrifying threat of physical violence, nor did it demand a ransom. It simply cleared its throat and began to read from what sounded like a meticulously researched ledger. It started with the Honorable Arthur Pendleton, the respected manager of the Oakhaven First National Bank, a man who sat in the front pew of the church every single Sunday. The phantom broadcaster calmly, methodically detailed exactly how Mr. Pendleton had been quietly embezzling funds from the accounts of deceased widows for over a decade, outlining the exact account numbers, the offshore wire transfers, and the specific dates of his crimes. The broadcast lasted for exactly 4 minutes, and then, with another sharp, violent crack of static, the soothing jazz music instantly returned, as if nothing had ever happened. But the damage was permanently done. In those 4 short minutes, the invisible architecture of Oakhaven had been fundamentally fractured. People lay awake in the dark, staring at the glowing dials of their radio sets, their hearts hammering against their ribs. The next morning, the town diner was suffocatingly quiet. No one looked each other in the eye over their coffee cups. Mr. Pendleton was arrested by the end of the day, completely destroyed by the sudden exposure. But the real terror was not the fall of a corrupt banker. The real, creeping terror that began to slowly suffocate the town was the realization that an invisible entity had been watching them in the dark. Someone knew their secrets. Someone had the technical capability to effortlessly hijack a federally regulated broadcast, and the Phantom had promised, right before the static returned, that he would be back next Friday night. The psychological tension that gripped the town of Oakhaven during the 7 agonizing days following the first broadcast is almost impossible to adequately describe. It was a tension so thick, so heavy, you could practically scrape it off the wallpaper. The concept of privacy, the fundamental pillar of 1950s suburban life, had been completely eradicated overnight. Suddenly, every single resident looked at their neighbors not with the usual friendly morning wave, but with deep, creeping suspicion. Was the man watering his lawn the phantom? Was it the quiet high school science teacher? Or was it you? Everyone who harbored a secret, which, in a town obsessed with projecting perfection, was absolutely everyone, walked around with a heavy, leaden knot of dread in their stomachs. The radio, once a comforting piece of living room furniture, transformed into a terrifying, ticking time bomb sitting on the mahogany console. When the second Friday night finally arrived, the entire town was awake. Nobody was pretending to sleep. The local police department, completely out of their depth, had frantically contacted the Federal Communications Commission. 2 federal agents in sharp, dark suits and fedoras had arrived in town, driving heavy, specialized vans equipped with massive, rotating triangulation antennas on the roof. They parked outside the WOKV transmission tower, drinking black coffee from thermoses, completely confident that they could instantly pinpoint the exact location of the unauthorized signal the moment it went live. They believed they were dealing with a simple, amateur prankster, a teenager with a ham radio kit who didn't understand federal law. They were profoundly, disastrously wrong. At exactly midnight, the static violently returned, slicing through the airwaves with brutal precision. The federal agents instantly scrambled in their vans, turning dials and desperately adjusting their heavy antennas, trying to catch a solid bearing on the signal. But the phantom was technically brilliant. The signal was ghosting. It was bouncing erratically off the surrounding hills, echoing and fracturing in a way that made it impossible to lock onto a single stationary origin point. And while the feds frantically spun their dials in the cold autumn night, the metallic, hollow voice returned to the living rooms of Oakhaven. And this time, the blade cut much deeper. The voice did not focus on financial crimes this time. It focused on the deeply guarded moral failings of the town's elite. It systematically exposed the mayor's long-standing illicit affair with his secretary, providing specific dates and locations of their secret meetings at a roadside motel 3 counties over. It revealed that the highly decorated, highly respected high school principal, a man who constantly preached morality to the youth, was drowning in massive, illegal gambling debts owed to dangerous men in Chicago. It exposed a prominent socialite who had secretly abandoned a child before moving to Oakhaven to reinvent herself. With every single name read aloud by the phantom, another pillar of the community violently collapsed. The immediate aftermath of the second broadcast was absolute, unmitigated chaos. The mayor was forced into a sudden, humiliating resignation by Monday morning. Marriages shattered in public, screaming matches erupted on pristine front lawns, and long-standing friendships were instantly destroyed by the revelations of deep, historical betrayals. The phantom broadcaster was not just revealing secrets, he was actively, intentionally weaponizing the truth to dismantle the town's entire power structure. He was an invisible, self-appointed inquisitor, acting as the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner of suburban morality. And the most terrifying aspect of the entire ordeal was that the voice never sounded angry, vindictive, or passionate. It delivered life-destroying information with the cold, detached precision of an accountant reading a grocery list. This complete lack of emotion made the broadcasts feel profoundly unnatural, almost demonic. By the end of the second week, Oakhaven was no longer a community. It was a war zone of paranoia, where the truth was far more dangerous and destructive than any physical weapon could ever be. By the time the third week rolled around, the town of Oakhaven had descended into a state of raw, unfiltered vigilantism. When the official authorities, the local police chief and the highly trained federal agents of the FCC, proved themselves completely powerless against an invisible threat, the social contract violently breaks down and the community aggressively turns inward. Fear is a powerful, blinding narcotic, and it quickly mutated into a desperate, rabid need to find a scapegoat. The townspeople were no longer just afraid of the phantom, they were terrified of being the next name read on the midnight broadcast. They believed that if they could just find the man behind the microphone, they could physically silence the truth, and somehow rebuild their shattered, comfortable illusions. This desperate paranoia birthed a modern-day witch hunt. Groups of men began patrolling the quiet, tree-lined streets after dark, carrying heavy flashlights and baseball bats, suspiciously interrogating anyone caught outside after 10 o'clock. The local radio repairman, a quiet, eccentric veteran who lived alone and possessed the technical knowledge to build a transmitter, found his shop windows violently smashed with heavy bricks. A brilliant but socially awkward high school student who built shortwave radios in his garage was aggressively dragged out of his home by local police and ruthlessly interrogated under a bright light for 12 hours, despite having absolutely no connection to the dark, historical secrets of the town's elite. The Phantom had successfully achieved something far more devastating than simply exposing affairs and embezzlement. He had successfully forced the good, moral citizens of Oakhaven to turn on each other like cornered, starving animals. Meanwhile, the federal agents were engaged in a desperate, escalating technical war of attrition. They had requisitioned additional equipment, bringing in massive military-grade direction-finding gear that looked like something pulled straight from a top-secret Cold War bunker. They realized that the reason they couldn't triangulate the signal was because the Phantom was not broadcasting from a dark basement or a hidden cabin in the woods. The signal was moving. The Phantom had built a highly sophisticated, incredibly powerful mobile transmitter, likely hidden in the back of an unassuming delivery truck or a heavy passenger van. He was driving the dark, winding, unpaved country roads that surrounded Oakhaven while he broadcasted, utilizing the heavily forested hills to bounce the signal and completely confuse the triangulation equipment. The third broadcast was the most terrifying one yet. It was a dark, rainy Friday night. The federal vans were aggressively patrolling the perimeter of the town, their massive antennas rotating wildly in the storm. At midnight, the static hit. But this time, the Phantom did not immediately begin reading names. Instead, the hollow metallic voice addressed the federal agents directly over the airwaves. He mocked their heavy vans, he mocked their outdated equipment, and he taunted them about their inability to catch a ghost. He even called out the specific license plate number of the FCC van currently parked near the water tower, proving that he was not just broadcasting, he was actively watching them in the dark. And then, he dropped a massive psychological bomb. The Phantom calmly announced that next Friday, on Halloween night, he would deliver his final broadcast. He promised to reveal a single, massive, deeply buried secret that involved the founding families of Oakhaven, a secret so dark, so completely unforgivable, that it would ensure the town would never, ever recover. The countdown to absolute destruction had officially begun. Final week leading up to the Halloween broadcast felt like a death watch in a condemned cell. The town of Oakhaven was completely paralyzed. Many of the older, wealthier families simply packed their expensive leather suitcases and quietly drove out of town in the middle of the night, terrified of what the Phantom was threatening to unearth. The federal government had completely flooded the area with agents. Unmarked cars sat at every major intersection, and technical specialists had rigged massive temporary listening posts on top of the highest hills. The police chief had essentially instituted a martial law curfew. No vehicles were allowed on the roads after 11 p.m. They were absolutely determined to trap the mobile transmitter the moment it sparked to life. Halloween night was bitterly cold, accompanied by a heavy, dense fog that rolled off the nearby river and completely swallowed the town, reducing visibility to a few frantic yards. The tension inside the federal vans was suffocating. At exactly midnight, the radios cracked, but it wasn't the usual burst of static. It was the sound of a heavy, deep breath, amplified through the distorted microphone. The agents instantly scrambled, locking onto the strongest, most stable signal they had ever received. The Phantom had stopped moving. He was broadcasting from a stationary location deep in the dense, heavily wooded area, known as Miller's Hollow, a few miles outside the town limits. The voice began to speak, slowly unraveling a horrifying historical narrative about a massive land swindle and a covered-up murder that had occurred 50 years prior, implicating the grandfathers of the town's current elite. While the chilling story echoed through the radios, a massive convoy of police cruisers and federal vans violently tore through the muddy, fog-choked logging roads, their sirens screaming into the night. They converged on an old abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods, the massive radio signal radiating off it like heat from a furnace. Heavily armed police officers kicked the rotting wooden door off its hinges, their flashlights violently piercing the darkness, screaming for the phantom to surrender. But the room was entirely empty. Sitting in the center of the dusty floor was a brilliant, highly complex masterpiece of makeshift engineering. It was a massive, military-grade radio transmitter, glowing hot with orange vacuum tubes, connected to a heavy array of stolen car batteries. And sitting on a small wooden table next to it was an expensive, reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder, the large spools slowly, methodically turning. The phantom had never been in the cabin. He had pre-recorded his final, devastating broadcast, wired it to a heavy mechanical timer, and vanished into the fog long before the police ever arrived. He had successfully manipulated the entire federal government, exposed the darkest foundations of the town, and walked away completely undetected. The authorities seized the equipment, but it yielded absolutely no fingerprints, no serial numbers, and no clues to the identity of the architect. The phantom broadcaster was never seen or heard from again, but he didn't need to be. He had accomplished his mission with terrifying perfection. Oakhaven never recovered. The massive secret he revealed sparked a wave of federal investigations, bankruptcies, and a mass exodus. The pristine, pastel-colored illusion was completely burned to the ground, leaving behind nothing but the charred, bitter reality of human nature. This file proves a very dangerous point, my friends. We spend our lives desperately building walls, buying locks, and projecting an image of absolute perfection to protect ourselves from the outside world. But the most dangerous threat is rarely the man trying to break into your house. The real danger is the man who already knows exactly what you are hiding in the basement and who simply decides to turn on the microphone. Stay vigilant, trust very few, and keep your radios tuned to this frequency. I am Arthur Wayne, and this archive never closes.